As we've touched on the program, the CPI figures, inflation, released yesterday for July, and there was an improvement. CPI has fallen to 3.5%. That was down from 3.8 in June. So finally, we're headed in the right direction. Is this good news for the economy overall? Is this a hint that inflation has been beaten? Have we broken the back of inflation? Will interest rates come down? We always talk to Leith Van Olsen about these issues every Thursday morning from Macro Business. Leith joins us. G'day, Leith.
Yeah, g'day, Clinton. How are you?
Good, mate. This is a positive, surely.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Look, this was a really funny result. So there was heaps of uncertainty among economists about, yesterday's reading because we didn't know how much the federal government's energy subsidies were going to impact the results. So, for example, market economists' predictions has varied from basically a 2.7% reading to 3.9%. And we ended up with 3.5%, which was down, as you said, from 3.8% in June. It was slightly above the median forecast of 3.4%. But as it turned out, the thing that drove the result was electricity prices in the CPI fell by 6.4% over the month. And that's really, due to these energy subsidies from the federal government. That said, we are seeing broadening disinflationary impacts beyond energy prices. So, for example, the number of items in the CPI basket with annual inflation tracking below 2% is actually now more than the number of items in the basket whereby inflation is tracking above the RBA's target of 3%. So what that basically tells you is that we are seeing broadening disinflation, and that's obviously, a good result.
So if this is the case, and I know Michelle Bullock said this a couple of weeks ago, she basically indicated that rates won't come down this year. Will this change the bank's thinking, or because that inflation rate is still beyond the target range of 2 to 3%, it's not going to change anything at the moment?
Yeah, probably not. So the Reserve Bank's going to look beyond the energy rebates, and it'll look at what's called underlying inflation. So that's what basically excludes volatile items, and that fell to 3.7% in July, which is down from 4%. So that's fallen as well, but it's still obviously above the RBA's target. And one thing that will concern the Reserve Bank somewhat is that pretty much all of the reduction in Australia's inflation has come from what's called tradable inflation. So that's basically stuff you pull off a container ship.
Yep.
So, all your electronics and those sorts of things that aren't produced here. Inflation there is running at 1.5% year on year, whereas domestic inflation, so your non-tradable stuff, mostly services, is remaining pretty sticky at around 5%. And the thing about it is because the tradables have fallen so much, they're tracking at 1.5%. They pretty much run the race, so they're not going to really fall much more from here. And that means that if inflation is going to fall back to the target, we basically need to see it on the sort of services non-tradable side. And because of that, I think the Reserve Bank's going to basically sit on its hands and just see how things play out because the road to returning back to inflation is, sort of a little bit slow and bumpy, it seems.
Yeah, it was nominated that the energy rebates are part of this. I'm presuming that there are different rebates at a state level, but this is with the federal government's $300 rebate. But that really wouldn't have kicked in a lot yet. It's $75 per quarter. No,
that's right. And in fact, the big hit's going to be next month. So the August CPI indicator, CBA, the Commonwealth Bank, their economists tip that it's going to lower electricity prices as they're measured in the CPI by 20% next month. And CBA is actually tipping that the monthly inflation reading next month is going to actually have a 2 in front of it. So it'll be 2 point something. And that's really owing to this, this huge decline in energy inflation, which is really manufactured by subsidies. It's not, real.
Yeah.
And but the CBA is also tipping that we're going to get lower services inflation as well as the reduction in wage growth recently starts feeding through to inflation. So inflation should continue to fall. It's just I don't think it's going to fall quickly enough for us to see rate cuts by the end of the year. And basically, for the Reserve Bank to cut rates this year, we're going to either need to see inflation fall a lot faster, or we're going to need to see unemployment rise significantly. And I don't think we're probably going to get either of those things by the end of the year. So that'll effectively mean that rate cuts will probably be delayed into next year.
Maybe the Prime Minister will get a present before the election.
Well, yeah, we'll see. I mean, look, they'll need to see one, fairly early on next year, I think, to turn the electorate around.
Now, the other big issue I wanted to talk to you about, because we often talk about university students and total number of people coming to this country. The government this week confirmed that they will cap international students at 270,000 Do you have confidence they'll stick to this number?
Yeah, look, it's important to point out like that the reason why I've got to this point is because Australia's concentration of international students is just off the charts. It's the highest of any major advanced nation by a long shot. So just to put that into perspective, as of May, according to the Department of Education, we had 810,000 international students enrolled in Australia, and according to the Department of Home Affairs visa data, roughly 1 in 30 people in Australia is currently on a student visa or a graduate visa. And this over-concentration has, had some pretty bad impacts on educational quality, as well as obviously pushing up, pressure on the rental market. And just this month, we've seen a whole bunch of reports from The Guardian and the ABC, etc., which have basically said that our major universities have been handing out degrees to people who can't speak functioning English and don't understand the coursework. And academics spoke out saying that they're not allowed to actually fail international students because it risks the business model. And on top of that, we've had reports of, widespread cheating. Local students have been paired with internationals in group assignments to help them pass. And the ABC even reported this month that some tutorials at Melbourne University have been held in foreign languages, entirely in Mandarin, which has basically precluded local students from participating. So that's pretty much the reason I've got here. Plus, obviously, we've seen an explosion in these fake ghost colleges, which basically don't teach anything. They're just there as a visa factory. So that's effectively why I've got here. Now, it's important to point out that this 270,000 is going to be down by about 50% from last year's level. That pretty much just brings numbers back to 2019 levels. And in 2019, Australia's was still had the highest concentration by far of international students. So, look, it's a welcome development, but it's certainly not, I don't think it's reducing numbers enough. And the other thing that really concerns me about this, Glenn, is that it does risk actually pivoting us towards having lower quality students, which sounds perverse. Like we certainly need a lower number, but we also need high quality. And the reason why it could lead to more lower quality students is that there was a thing called Ministerial Direction 107. So that was brought in a couple of years ago when we had an explosion of, students from questionable students coming from South Asia, from Africa, etc., who were rolling in university courses. And as soon as they got here, they switch over to dodgy, private colleges because they're cheaper, and they weren't actually coming here to study. And they were studying at second-tier universities, etc. So what the government did is it brought in this direction, which basically required that immigration officials prioritise visa applications from students from nations with who are more likely to be genuine students. And what that did was that biased Chinese students over, say, Indian students. And what that meant was that the major universities, so your group of 8 universities, the Universities of Sydney, Melbourne, etc., grew their student numbers, whereas the regional universities actually had a decline in student numbers because they weren't getting as many from South Asia, from Africa, etc. What the federal government's done is that with these caps, it's actually repealed that Ministerial Direction 107. And what it means is that although we're going to get lower numbers overall, we're going to actually get more of the non-genuine students going to regional universities now. And that will lead to, it could lead to an overall degradation of quality. And for this reason, the regional universities are really happy about the reforms. They're cheering them on because it'll basically open the spigot back up to students from South Asia, from Africa, etc. Whereas the group of 8 universities are really angry about it because they're likely to have less Chinese students, for example. And the problem with it is, so we instead of aiming for a much lower quantity of very high quality students, it looks like Labor's instead opted for a slightly smaller quantity of lower quality students. And for that reason, I think the reforms could end up actually being a failure.
So we're not getting the mix right yet.
No, that's right. Basically, if Labor was serious about reforming the international education system to make sure that it was high quality and also, takes the pressure off rents and, improves academic standards, et cetera, it would have basically raised financial barriers. So it would have made it more expensive to come here, for starters, so that they can actually pay their way rather than work in jobs. It would have increased entrance requirements. So, for example, it would have significantly increased English language proficiency and academic testing. So it would have made students sit academic testing before they come here to make sure they're up to scratch. And also would empower academics to be able to fail students if they weren't up to scratch, because at the moment they're being told they're not allowed to fail them. It would abolish group assignments. I think it should also, abolished the link between studying and working as well. So at the moment, a student visa for a lot of these people coming over is viewed as a work visa because you can come over and work unlimited. Well, they're supposedly capped at 24 hours a week, but you can come over and work while you're studying. And for that reason, we've had a lot of students come to questionable colleges, second-tier universities, etc., really for the purpose of working and then to hopefully get permanent residency. Whereas I think if they made it more about quality rather than quantity and did these things, I think we'd get a smaller number of very high-quality students, which is really what we should be aiming for. And I think Labor's failed on that token.
I guess there's less money for the universities then. Always good to talk to you, Leith. We'll catch up next week.
Yeah, cheers, Clinton. Thanks for that.
Leith Van Oselen from Macro Business.